Welcome, everyone, to Defending Our Children. We've got a guest for you today that I think is going to be empowering to listen to. He's a longtime personal friend of mine. His name is Kirt Rothe. We met each other in the Federal Air Marshal Service, where we worked together in Las Vegas. He's a Special Forces veteran, a former federal law enforcement agent, and he's worked at FLETC, and he oversaw the active shooter response program. Kirt, you can correct me if I gotten that aspect of it wrong, but I do encourage you to share with people your experience and qualifications on the active shooter topic, of which we are going to hammer down pretty hard today.
Well, thank you for having me, Craig. Yeah, I spent probably my first 4 or 5 years as a chief at Federal Law Enforcement Training Center over the Active Shooter Threat Response Program. Mostly it's typically a response. It's a reactive program, based on current trends. Continue with the modification and course review and course curriculum development with that program until an opportunity came up to work with the Behavioral Science Division. So I took over as chief at the Behavioral Science Division. And from there, I served as the moderator and planning committee team for the National Summit on the Prevention of Multi-Casualty Violence. And we completed the first iteration of 3 iterations of that committee the day that Newtown school shooting unfolded. And it kind of led into several more years of us going back and trying to work out a toolkit to provide state and local governments in order to help prevent the possibility of these situations coming about.
Yeah, there was once upon a time when you and I were looking to collaborate on starting up a service to go around training local law enforcement and schools on how to harden those facilities.
How to harden and resolve.
Yes, sir.
Not to be a soft target.
Yeah, that came and went. There's a lot to standing these programs up, and my bandwidth was kind of maxed out on other things at the time, but it's such a worthy topic. It's always been. I mean, our greatest national resource, the children, are our future.
Absolutely.
And in this war on children, and I'm not hesitant to say it anymore, there is a war being made on children, and you can measure it through any of a number of ways.
Right.
And one of which is this active shooter trend. And if you really care about the children, if you genuinely care and you want to change what's happening, you will address the causation. Why are people inclined to go after the little ones? What causes, what all leads up to that? We can unpack all of that as we go, but I appreciate your service to our country, brother. You're a friend that I have a lot of respect for.
Thank you.
Really do. And you and I we make sure our paths cross again and again for certain things. And
definitely stay in touch.
We won't go into all of it, but it's good. It is good. And so I celebrate you and this chance to chat with you on a subject that's impacting everybody, whether they realize it or not, in our country. What's happening? So, man, I'll start off by saying let's allow you to just make your observations on the issue of active shooter. What do you think are the biggest broad strokes? And we can unpack it and get into the details a little bit later. But what do you think people most need to kind of see and recognize about what's going on with this?
I'll tell you, probably the biggest issue that I've seen is that the American people, I mean, we have a memory reset that happens within a short period of time after these instances happen. And the state and local governments, particularly in the departments of education, a lot of times they just want to roll those dice and gamble, and it's not going to happen there. With the thousands upon thousands of schools we have in this country, the chances on it happening at their school are relatively minimum. And they, their training is not necessarily adequate. They're not having constant threat assessments done on their facilities on how to harden their resolve and not to be that soft target. If the offender can't get through the front door, then, they're often more apt to go someplace else. It's a little bit easier to gain access to that facility.
Well, hold on, Kirt. Are you suggesting that due to the totality of your special forces training and your federal law enforcement training and education, that hope is not an adequate plan?
No, it's not an adequate plan. You don't hope for the best, and you plan for the worst and hope for the best is what you do. But you're always planning for the worst. I just wanted to give you a chance to say that, because obviously that's where you're going. Man, to think of a precious national resource, man, our future and our children, that in many cases, hope seems to be the plan relied on.
by the institutions that house and educate our children. We do owe them better. If there's a threat, we must harden these places against it. So,
something as simple as a school's lockdown procedure can make a world of difference. How are they, treating those, or how are they handling the situation if the, incident occurs at one end of the school and they know that the gunfire is not anywhere near them, but they're still locking them down in a controlled area where they have no way of getting out of the building or getting away from it altogether. Almost creating a condensed group of people in a small space. It's like what happened a lot in the Newtown school shooting.
So would this be like a one size fits all plan instead of a plan that would vary based upon what's happening?
That is the difficult. So what the difficult part about their plans are is that they have to plan it based on what their environment is, where the rooms are, where sub rooms are inside these classrooms. Are the walls made out of concrete brick, or are they made out of just board and wood? And that determines whether it only provides cover or basically concealment from fire. Yeah, it's just it's a tough situation. A lot of these schools now, they get the alert or in the tone over the loudspeaker, and they go into lockdown procedures. They'll go up and lock the main door and maybe funnel all the kids into a sub room inside that building and do a lockdown there. Well, if this situation's happening all the way on the other cross side of the school, wouldn't it be better to run until you can't run anymore and then hide? And if your unfortunate situation would be that they find you, then be ready to fight.
I have a daughter left in high school, but at the time I had two kids in high school, and I told them, I said, if you ever have an active shooter, and if you see an exit where you can go into the parking lot towards, away from the shooting, I've taught them how, Craig basically has trained me. And so I've listened to his training, but I don't want them locked in a box.
Nope. Just containing that target. Yeah. You're doing part of the job of that active threat is looking for, a soft target.
Yeah. I would love it if those who are planning to harm the little ones are pretty worried about not only law enforcement, but fathers and local law enforcement and even school guards at some point sprinting toward them and taking them out of the fight quickly as soon as they get started. I celebrate whenever that happens. And if people really want solutions, they would celebrate whenever that happens. It seems to be minimized in the stories of the news coverage. Whenever that happens, like, active shooter goes into a church, pulls a gun, and gets dropped by a veteran and expert who just decided to put a stop to the tragedy right then and there. Well, that should be something celebrated far and wide. And
we saw it in Texas not too long ago with the at the religious facility shooting. There was people that were armed in the crowd, and they didn't last less than 10 seconds, and that shooter was taken out, and nobody else was injured from that point on, all because people were willing to take the responsibility for everybody else's safety.
Yes, sir.
And those people with the proper training.
So I personally have to wonder, when someone can't celebrate that, and when any outlet does not publish that with great celebration, what their motives may really be. Right. I question it, because it makes sense that if you care about the victims, then you celebrate the solutions. You celebrate what works.
Right.
So if you're just neutral, then that's what we would see more of. So
absolutely.
Well, let's cut to a quick break. We'll come back on the other side. We'll unpack this a little bit more. Kurt, I look forward to the rest of this conversation. I think people are going to be empowered from it. So thank you for coming on. Everybody, stay tuned. We got a lot more coming from Kirt Rothe on Defending Our Children.
Thank you, Craig.
Welcome back to Defending Our Children, everybody. We are on with Kirt Rothe. We're talking about schools and our children. How do we defend them from those who want to cause mass casualties against the little ones? In this case, the active shooter trend. What all's going on there? What's really happening? And what can we do about it? So we've got Kirt, who's an expert on the subject. We're having a good conversation. Kirt, what do you think we need to hit on next? Going maybe from big to small. We've got a trend and some observations on it. What do people most need to know?
Well, when I was on the co-author committee with the NRA's National School Shield, we did a pretty comprehensive assessment of school shootings and public place shootings and things of that nature. What we found out is it's going to have to, in order to harden our resolve for these and prevent these situations. And again, prevention is kind of tough because we have no way to quantify that if we took action and actually prevented an incident. Very difficult for us to show any data in that area. But it's bringing all the people to the table to have those intelligent conversations that concern around healthcare, whether somebody's had any mental health issues, education care. Education have had some issues in their school with conduct and discipline. The one commonality we found between all the active shooters of over 280 that we analyzed was they all had a propensity for violence prior to the incident. And I think that organizations need to spend a little bit more time taking things seriously, because you have a whole bunch of dimensions. You have social media, you have communications between family, maybe even communication with clergy members and things of that nature. And until we find a way to be able to tie all those in for everybody to connect the dots, it's a very difficult situation to prevent.
Yeah.
It is possible.
Yes, sir. It is. Whenever I see internationally, there are crazy people that go freaky Jason, if you will, with a knife. They go on a train and they start slicing a bunch of people up and stabbing everybody, or they release rice and toxic chemicals, or they take a truck and they drive it into a crowd. I think until we really start analyzing what causes these people to become so broken and to lash out and start really addressing those things, then we're not really going to make any progress. And the solutions seem to be always to ban inanimate objects rather than to address the causation. What causes people to get so broken and so detached with a lack of compassion for their fellow humans, and so callous that they think that this is somehow any sort of solution. And so they'll ban inanimate objects, which really only impacts the law-abiding, because it's not the law-abiding citizens that are doing these things. So
I'll even take it to the next level on that. We talk about something as even as hardening your resolve. They battle with the idea of turning their education establishment into a level 1 security prison in order to deny people access in and out. But what a lot of people don't realize is that the only rules and regulations, the only thing that prevents or even discourages is a law-abiding citizen to follow those rules and regulations. That individual that has ill intent, there is a way to getting access to weapons. That's how they do it, the illegal means. So any type of litigation they do legally, it's all based on the people willing to comply to those legal regulations.
Well, here's something I can share, and I didn't anticipate sharing this. And so for today's purpose, I'll leave names out of it. But you and I were once in a federal law enforcement field office where the special agent in charge was so afraid of his own agents, patriots, heroes in a lot of cases. He was so terrified of his own people that he wanted the agents who had the strictest, most demanding pistol qualification course in law enforcement anywhere on earth. Even though they're that highly competent, he wanted them to come in, even though they were just maybe going to do some admin work for a few minutes. He wanted them to go down the hallway, take their weapon, their firearm, unload it, put it in a lockbox, lock it, go do their admin work, then go back down the hall, take the weapon, reload it, holster it, and then leave. And none of us could figure out why he wanted that at the time. And looking back on it, I see that as the same prevalent mindset of this deep state, corrupt cabal, if you will, that they're so afraid of their own people that they want their people disarmed at all costs. And I'm asking, like, well, why? And it wasn't until later with a special congressional delegation investigation that revealed that the guy was keeping illegal dirt files on his own agents, and that if his own agents had learned what he was doing against us in secret, he expected that he should be harmed. Like that's where his own guilty conscience was. And that's where that motive came from, to disarm his own guys. And I can superimpose that across this corruption within our federal government and this fear of the American citizens, the law-abiding citizens. What are they doing to us? It begs the question that they're so terrorized that families would turn against them. Law-abiding citizens would somehow turn against them, that they need us disarmed, that they go after us so frantically instead of addressing the actual causation of these mentally ill people who lash out in acts of violent crime.
Well, because it boils down to it's the only area that they actually have full control on taking action.
Yeah.
They can institute immediate change, right, wrong, or indifferent, but it's something that they can put on paper to report up to Washington, D.C. that they're doing some good things and hardening their resolves, when actually they're making the organization less safe, the agents less safe, and the general public less safe. So what if an emergency happens at the airport or something of that nature, or whatever the scope of their law enforcement is? They've got their weapons. How many police stations have been attacked?
Right.
Now they're making their own employees soft targets. The leadership has very, very toxic traits, and that's one of the main toxic traits right there, is not really caring what the overall safety and mission of your people is. But if you can check a box for some evaluation or some initiative that your boss asks you to do, just so it looks good on paper and everybody gives them the thumbs up and they can move on to something else.
I won't say too much about the behind the scenes stuff that I know, but take Beirut, the Marine Corps embassy barracks, the Marine Corps barracks bombing. Their guards were made to have their rifles unloaded, and they were guarding hundreds of Marines who were vulnerable, sleeping in their barracks. And terrorists figured that out and capitalized on it. And I think that's what predators do. They look for soft targets. They look for, like you said, maybe field offices where the agents are unarmed, or schools where the children are undefended, and they go and they prey there, and with catastrophic results. And I think hardening these targets and empowering the citizens is the right way to go. And I just hope that everybody will kind of wake up and recognize that and push that way, so that it is that way, so that we can minimize the harm done. That's kind of what I'd like to see. Forrest, what are your thoughts on all this?
Well, I was going to ask Kirt, if you look at these guys and gals that are going into schools and shooting them up, they're hyper focused. I mean, they're obsessed with a mission, whether, even though it's not a noble cause, it's the opposite. But I mean, what are your thoughts on how well trained and studied on their mission, in your experience?
Well, I'll tell you, based on my experience, they all research each other because they want to have more of an impact when they carry these events out. They're planned. They do surveillance. They look for vulnerabilities in the surveillance. Even in the most recent one, the individual actually attended the school. They knew the layout, knew the property, knew where to go on how to get there. Best access is inside and out. So they do their research, and they're looking for those vulnerable targets, those softer targets that have the most impact.
Hard for me to comprehend how someone resigns themselves to harming the little ones in all the different ways that they do it. But my wife says crazy people just can't make sense. When people are that depraved and vile that they've turned their hearts over to something that evil, well, it's never going to make sense to healthy people, because we're just not wired that way, folks. Well, we're going to address more of this on the other side of this break. Stay tuned. We will be right back. Welcome back to Defending Our Children. We're on with Kirt Rothe. We're talking about active shooter scenarios. Why do people do this? How do we protect the little ones? How do we make it safer? And it's a great conversation. Kirt, I appreciate your input on this. I think this is a great chat. Really great chat on it.
Thank you. Happy to be here.
We just signed off before the break. My wife is telling me crazy people can't make sense. Unless you are as depraved and you have such lack of compassion or empathy for others that you would do this, it's never going to make sense, because evil is a sickness. There are a lot of reasons that people are mentally ill, but it's a sick soul that harms others, and especially in mass. And then when you superimpose that over the children, the most innocent, the most pure, the most precious, I think that's the gutter level of evil. There's nowhere lower to go.
Not only is it a cowardly act, but we also have to look on how we approach this after these incidents occur. They almost immortify these active shooters.
Mm-hmm.
These people that are literally just a disgrace to society, that they take out that aggression on innocent children and take lives. All of a sudden, they become the focus of the media. Well, why don't we focus on the victims and the families? Why do they have to put so much? We should never mention those individuals' names ever again. They should be just referred to as the offender.
Yeah.
They shouldn't be given any notoriety or anything of that nature, because what that does is the next person that has these ideas coming through their head, they want to top it. They want their name as number one on the list.
Any of us in the counterterrorist realm understand that they need the media, they need the coverage to further their agenda. There's an agenda for the terror that they commit. It's not the act, it's the public impact of the act that they're after. And those who are savvy to it won't give it to them. You're absolutely right.
I will actually take that to another level. They do so much research to include actual things, tangible things or tangible occurrences that they can that can be reported. Do you realize in Virginia Tech that the shooter from Virginia Tech had gone to the range several days before that and practiced shooting targets that were on the ground, like they're walking through the row of a school classroom, and they were seen and observed, but people failed to report. The night before the incident in Virginia Tech, that individual was caught by one of the janitors chaining the doors, denying law enforcement access. It was never reported to law enforcement. Number one, what the janitor cited, he was an Asian kid and I was white. I don't want to be labeled as a racist, so I didn't say anything.
Wow.
You have the same situation with the gun owner. It was his son that owned the gun range, and their father saw it. They knew it looked odd. They knew it looked unusual, but really didn't think anything of it. We don't have avenues where people are becoming reluctant to report because they're worried about the fallout if, it can be bent or misconstrued in any type of racial or other manner. They're scared to report or come forward and say something.
That's where the fear not, do right mantra comes into play. Stop being everybody, please, concerned about what someone might think when lives are at stake. We have the responsibility as humans to stand up and speak truth and expose that which is harmful. And only in a society where people are intimidated and beat down and silenced through some sort of coercion is evil allowed to thrive. Because people aren't speaking the truth and they're not sharing and understanding and acting and voting in their own best interest because they're overridden and oppressed and beaten down.
Well, they are speaking the truth. People are speaking the truth about that, but media and other avenues, because it's not going to sell them a gross amount of, ads or advertisements. So they choose not to air that information, which is probably the most important information that should come out. How do we prevent these things from ever happening again? The entire community has to get involved. There has to be more open channels of communication. The society needs to have a venue saying, hey, Johnny such and such just posted a picture of himself on Facebook of a weapon and a bunch of high capacity magazines and put the remark of, coming to get you. You guys need to be aware of this. We don't have avenues to report that.
I think people have also lost faith in our system, because I could imagine if I were working at the gun range and I wanted to go to report that to law enforcement, I could, but would I have the faith that they would do something about it? I mean, would they even talk to the kid? And I'm not blaming law enforcement, but we're seeing more and more their hands are tied. Kirt, what do you have to say about that?
Well, a lot of this is organizations. They're just hoping. Everybody wants to roll a dice. Well, maybe it's nothing. I'm just overthinking it. Same situation with the people that are responsible for school safety. They want to roll that dice just to hope and make sure that, just to hope that nothing like that ever happens in their area of responsibility.
Well, I had the pleasure of training 7 different local law enforcement agencies in Southern Texas recently. And one of the things that I was telling them is my frustration at how I've seen in situations where law enforcement are having to draw their weapons and defend themselves, that citizens are walking right up to them and putting their cell phone camera right in the officer's face, trying to catch him making a mistake in a life and death situation. And I don't know how our society gets ground down to that level of dysfunction.
Craig,
but it won't do. And I think our law enforcement need to have a rule whereby in a dangerous situation, they can demand and command a 30-meter perimeter of free space around them or whatever it needs to be. But having been a former Fed, you'll understand I think that's something we need to implement.
Absolutely. that is also a generational thing. My generation and you're, Craig, we're about the same age, and we came up through a generation where we respected law enforcement. And law enforcement said, "Stay back." I'm staying my butt back. In fact, I might walk back another 10 feet just to make sure I'm outside their parameters. They said we respected them. We knew they had a job to carry out, and we let them do it. We also knew that there were administrative ways to handle things and misconduct and stuff like that, going right through the right channels with the police department. We'll get looked into. Now everybody wants to get involved. They want to have that next, $100,000 video that they can sell to the news media, and they're walking right up there, invading that personal space. What if the officer has to use deadly force? Now, all of a sudden, we got a bunch of people surrounding around him with video cameras. Maybe he can't make that choice, and he gets shot, or even worse, some people holding video cameras get shot. Law enforcement doesn't have the respect that it did 20 years ago from society. And it's all based on the media and the way media is portrayed, isolated incidents throughout the country.
Yeah. Look, if somebody's a rogue officer and beating grandma down without cause, I'm all for that being videoed and that officer.
Well, even that case, other officers will take it. We'll take charge of that, and we'll conduct an internal investigation. We've had mechanisms for years in place to prevent that. It's just like any other career. They have one or two bad apples that spoils a whole bunch, and that's the way it's been for the last 10 years.
Yes, sir. But to have them crowded with people with cameras trying to catch them doing wrong when they're fighting for their life is unacceptable. And I do believe there needs to be a very clear law that the public is briefed on, and an officer can ask for that, command that 30
horribly unsafe for the officer, and even more so unsafe for the citizen standing around trying to get that video.
Agreed. Well, we're going to do another half of this show on the other side, Kirt, but we're wrapping up the last segment here. Do you want to let everybody know where to find you and support what you do, or are you more on the private side these days?
I'm just on the private side right now until I get finished my last 2 years in law school.
All right. So I'll say this then. Kirt is a friend and ally of Veterans for Child Rescue, to put it mildly. And so you can help and support him probably by supporting our Oregon mission. And,
absolutely. Any day of the week.
As Kirt grows and expands, and he has anything else to direct you guys to, we'll be happy to steer you to him, because he's a good man doing good work. So God bless those who are serving and protecting in good faith at every level and every manner of service. There's still a lot of good people working away. It's just we don't hear enough about it out there. So, Kirt, thanks for coming on. We'll continue on the other side of this. But everybody else, we hope you join us for the second half with Kirt Rothe on Defending Our Children. Thank you. Welcome to Defending Our Children, everyone. We are on with I consider him a right fighter, American patriot. He is a friend of mine. His name is Kirt Rothe. He is a Special Forces veteran. He is a federal law enforcement veteran, and he has served in numerous capacities in service of our nation. And he is an active shooter expert, in my opinion, due to his responsibility and access at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. Kirt, welcome back onto the show for our second half of our chat with you, sir.
Again, Craig, thanks for having me on. I'm excited about this topic. It's always meant something very near and dear to me for pretty much my entire professional career.
Yes, sir.
Started right after the Columbine incident.
Yeah, what an ugly occurrence that was for everybody who involved, and it impacted all of us in different ways, but none of them good, really. So thank you. So we've talked a little bit about solutions and who needs to be armed. Some believe that teachers need to be armed. I know some teachers that, quite frankly, don't have the personal makeup to have the responsibility for a firearm. Not everybody's physically capable. Maybe it's weak or small hands or injuries or the psychological lack of the ability to bear the responsibility and make life or death decisions, even in the face of overwhelming threat and violence, when it seems like the solution is obvious. And some very capable, highly capable, and I would want armed if my child were in that classroom, so that he or she could stop the violence immediately when confronted with it. But I think we all agree that whoever is going to be armed and capable solving problems needs to be prepared to do so through the proper training and education on it. You've been involved in some of that discussion, Kirt.
Yep.
You want to share a little bit of that with us?
So we did a pretty comprehensive analysis when we wrote the National School Shield with the NRA. We did look at different aspects and not trying to take a side or be judgmental or anything. We just said that, if you're going to arm people other than law enforcement officers, of what I mean by school resource officers that are actually attached to a law enforcement agency, that it needs to come with a, great deal of training that continues, every 6 months qualification, firearms, use of force, all the basis box that need to be checked in order to, have all the knowledge underneath your belt to use deadly force if you have to as a law enforcement officer, which, we all hope it never happens. But if it does, you're prepared and ready. In-depth training, also the hiring process that goes back on the, local schools or facilities on who to hire the right people for the job. There's a lot of, veteran law enforcement or military people out there that'd be more than happy to, but the answer is, could they physically do it? So does it have to come with a physical testing battery? Just a lot of things that current law enforcement agencies go through in order to keep their numbers up within their organization. And they could team up with law enforcement. Most recent one in Nashville for a school shooting, there was no school resource officer present. In the city of Nashville, in a very affluent school in that area as well. Was it a budget decision? Those questions will have to be answered by those organizations. But just having a person there and present and armed is a big deterrent as well. If you're looking at doing an analysis of your target and where you're going for, you're not going to want to go get into a gunfight right off the bat. So, they're going to look at those officer schedules. They're going to look at, where they normally sit, where they hang out, things of that nature before initializing any type of planning phase and initiation phase of the operation.
Well, I tell you what, I've been the beneficiary of millions of dollars worth of training in law enforcement and the Marines and the SEAL teams, and man, even in high threat mobile security for the State Department and the intelligence community, just continuing training. And every time people, I can speak generally, every time we get to a certain level, we think, man, we're highly trained now, and you go to another training that's even more demanding, and it makes you even more capable. And I've been through so many layers. I've broken through so many paradigms and realized, man, every time I get more training, I get better.
Absolutely.
Today, I sit here at almost 60 years old, and I've been through all these dozens and dozens and dozens of schools and qualification courses and performed very well. I learn every day. Right. And every school that I go through, every course I go through, I learn more. So I really like the idea of the American citizens being highly capable. Knowledge is power. And if you love people, you want them empowered. So I want the citizens to be empowered with the capability to defend themselves, to defend the little ones. And I think anybody that's got much wisdom and experience around the world recognizes that that's a healthy dynamic to have, is where the citizens are empowered. Certainly that's the dynamic our founding fathers envisioned, because you can see it in everything that they said and all the documents that they created to protect us from a tyrannical, abusive government where absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so I like that. I encourage more training programs for people to be safer and more effective, and with firearms and every other manner by which we protect ourselves and our little ones. So there's my little rant on that.
Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. Nothing ever goes wrong with more training.
Yeah. Kirt, did you guys, when in your analysis of all this, did y'all do any budget analysis on a per school basis for physically setting it up plus personnel? Did you do any kind of analysis in those regards?
There was a company or organization that took up and did several of those after we finished the toolkit through the National Summit of Preventing Multiple Casual Violence. I was not involved because it would be a conflict of interest for me. I can't broker anything being an employee of the federal government that in the civilian side that gain anybody money that'd be against conducts. And so, but I was aware of the numerous organizations that have taken the responsibility of doing these threat analysis at the local schools and churches and things of that nature. But as far as the cost and budgeting is concerned, that's usually dependent on, I know when they did the analysis, they say, okay, at minimum, you can harden your resolve by doing these two things, all the way up to, well, if you had the unlimited budget, this is what we would recommend.
But no numbers are floating around in the discussions that you heard?
No, I was never any part of that, but it would be in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. If you take the salary of a school resource officer and everything else that comes behind that, you're in the $100,000 plus range between training and equipment, everything else, and annual salary. You look at any type of equipment, they have these collapsible rooms that go into the schools where they, can push them back. They're whiteboards on the outside. And then if in an amount, the unfortunate event that there is an active shooter, they can lock that front door to the classroom, reach over and open that. It just basically opens up into a secure bulletproof room, and they can go in there and lock themselves down. But those things are probably about $100,000 to $125,000 per unit. So you imagine a school with 100 rooms. Now you're in the millions. You have each one of those in each classroom in each school. So you're looking, it's very costly, very expensive. And then they keep in mind, how high do we have to keep this level of security up, and not that make the kids feel like they're going into a prison.
Right.
And it's a place of education and learning, and an environment where the kids are supposed to develop. Well, if they're being developed inside of a prison house, it's not going to have, good effects on them as they get older.
Yeah. I walked a principal of our children's elementary school years and years ago, probably a decade ago, through some, security analysis of that school. And he was open to it, and he made the changes according to it. And I told him, I said, look, man, it's good to have your staff on walkie-talkies so they can reach right out and report something. It's good if you have drills so your teachers know how to lock the children in the classroom. Some of these doors are pretty heavy duty and hard to get through, and it certainly slow down the shooter's progress and access. And there are basic fits around the facility to prevent just willy-nilly public access. But that borders on what you're talking about, the prison appearance and all that. But let's talk a little bit more about that on the other side of this break, folks. Stay tuned. We'll be right back with more from Kirt Rothe on Defending Our Children. Welcome back to Defending Our Children, everybody. We are on with Kirt Rothe. I've seen some really good ideas from people, just devices that would block doors, that would make a door much more difficult to breach from the outside, that teachers could use to kind of create a hard room for their children. And some of these are not very expensive solutions, and they would certainly slow down a shooter's progress. I hope that a lot of those are being looked at, but there's a lot more. There are a lot more options out there. And Kirt, you've dealt with so much. Let's talk about it a little bit more.
Of course, there's a cost. It's all going to come with great cost anytime you take a front entrance and turn it into something that's ballistically capable of keeping an offender out. And, you look at, in case the unfortunate situation is they actually get through the door, how are we going to protect those students in the classroom? And the big question of what's our policies going to do to protect them? Do we go into immediate lockdown and just hope it doesn't come to our classroom? Or do we say, okay, lockdown, that's coming from the other end of the building. Let's keep these people out of the classroom, have them run and get away from the fire. And, there's just a lot of questions that have to be answered, decisions that the administrative staff at the schools have to keep into account when developing their policies. And, in some cases, those policies can be faulty. And just because a lot of people developing those have very little or no law enforcement or physical security background, they have to bring people in from outside sources. Rutherford County here uses a one central person that there's a prior law enforcement officer that is managing for all the schools in Rutherford County in Tennessee. And even with this situation, most recently in Nashville, Tennessee, only being less than 20 miles from my place of residence, the local schools went into a safety stand down on Monday to review policies and retrain their teachers in case of a situation ever happens here in Rutherford County. But even that, after speaking with members of their organization and the teachers realm, the end user, the people that are actually have to carry out these policies when things happen, they just did a quick video review and maybe some discussions on whatever format they use on their computer amongst their leadership, and that was it. Instead of taking a comprehensive look at the policy and saying, is our policy going to work? Are our doors, can they take a ballistic hit and still deny people access, like what happened in the school in Nashville? Are those ballistic windows bulletproof or at least resistant to the point where it would then allow more time?
We have to look at who are the most likely first responders too, in a lot of cases. I mean, And
Now,
the Texas school shooting down in Uvalde, wasn't it an off-duty Air Force PJ that went smoking in there, a pair of shorts,
yeah,
and saved the day? Well, back to the LA bank shooting with the shooters that were all covered with giant body armor. It was an LA cop that he'd been out on a run and would got the call, and he jumped in a vehicle and smoked over there and ended up being the one taking these guys down. And so it's just problem solvers who lack the fear, who go in and save the day. And when I talk to the schools and law enforcement around Tucson a decade ago, they were saying, well, Craig, is probably going to be an on-duty patrol officer that's going to be the first one to get there, because they're going to get the call. And it takes the SWAT team a little time to convene and map out a plan. And that's why I was saying, okay, well, does the SWAT team have a diagram of this school, and are they coordinated with you, the principal and the staff, so that when they need to come, they're coming into friendly territory and home turf? And they said, no, they've never been here. They've never walked the land. And I'm like, they need to walk this school. They need to have breaching materials. They need to have they need to have keys and access. They need to know the staff. They need to know what radio freaks you're on, if you're on radios and all that kind of stuff. But it's not going to be the SWAT team. It's going to be the average patrol officer who can get there first. And if there's one or two of them, and if they've got adequate, and a lot of times you only need a pistol, but I mean, would I choose a carbine over only a pistol if I was going to run in for an active shooter? Heck yeah, I would. Would I grab some sort of ballistic shield if I had that in my patrol vehicle? Yeah, I think I would. And I would smoke in there as quick as I could, all things considered. The situation's going to dictate, but try to hear where that shooting is, gain some sort of assertion on how many you're dealing with. If there's one shooter, there's no reason why, in my opinion, a highly motivated law enforcement officer can't close with on that threat and quietly, and then engage and stop it fairly quickly. If you've got a shield with you, it seems like, man, that really reduces the likelihood that you're going to get hit as you close with, because you can choose how you present yourself, how you engage. Because if you can hear the shooter firing, you can close with that threat and target without them knowing in a lot of cases, and then engage when you decide to. So
I'll even take it up a level there. Not only is it important for the uniform officer, that first responder, Rutherford County does an outstanding job. I got to give a lot of credit to City of Murfreesboro and Rutherford County Sheriff's Office. They have full-time school resource officers at just about every school in this county that's under county or under state budget. The first responders are going to be just that, just like you said, Craig. The people that are traveling in the community, could be an off-duty officer, hears it on a radio or gets some communication through his phone. Also may be an actual on-duty officer respond, but also you're going to have multiple agencies. So, if Rutherford County is not training with Murfreesboro PD, when you have these people show up on scene, it could be a devastating results because they don't know how to train together and communicate together inside the building. I saw the video of Nashville PD and the response, the two officers that eliminated the threat. I'll tell you, they were communicated with each other. They understood. They already had lights and sirens and things going off inside the building from the emergency systems that they had. They communicated with each other, weren't trying to whisper over these loud sounds because they know nobody's going to be able to hear them anyway. So they talk, very clearly. And also, once they got a sound indicator, an audio indicator of where the shooter could possibly be at, then they bypass threat areas and move to the location of the shooter. It's a tough thing to do, but there's some risk that you have to accept, in the process of your response. If you're not hearing shots from in the room, and it's going to save you a little bit of time, because every 7 to 10 seconds, that could be statistically another body.
Yeah.
And they want to respond as quick as they can and eliminate that threat as quick as they can, and then continue to secure the entire school.
Yeah.
I'm very impressed with the response.
I would hope that law enforcement are relatively comfortable arriving on scene when other law enforcement officers are already actively dealing with it. Whenever I train law enforcement, I push for a lot of threat recognition and target ID, because in the counterterrorism realm, it won't do any good to send, a tier 1 unit around the world in the dark of night and breach and effect entry, and only to shoot the hostage instead of the terrorist. Right. So we were drilled very, very heavily on that. And so that's and that's the environment that our law enforcement face. So I always put friendly targets among the hostile targets when I'm training them, even then when there's a high volume of fire necessary for that block of training. I'd always try to put friendly targets in there so that there's always a threat recognition, target ID, and shot placement, so that never are they sending rounds into anything other than the threat. It's a very deliberate, decisive, controlled process. And might you come around the corner expecting to engage a threat and it's a fellow law enforcement officer? Yes, it might happen. And so that level of discipline, that fire discipline and target ID has to be there, but that comes through training. And our law enforcement officers deserve that training. They're not often given that training because it's expensive, and there's not a lot of, once they go through the academy, there's not a lot of budget allocated to continuing training. But training cannot be once and done. It needs to be continuing, because these are perishable skills, especially when your heart rate is spiked through a sudden violent confrontation, and your body psychologically, it shunts off the blood flow to the outer cortex of your brain, and it is much more difficult to think quickly under that stress. So that's something that they deserve to be trained on continually, so that they serve all of us and survive these sudden violent confrontations. Folks, stay tuned. We'll be right back with more Defending Our Children. Welcome back to Defending Our Children, everybody. This is the last segment we have with Kirt Rothe today. Been a good chat, and I think we've got some more in the tank as we close this out. So, Kirt, I've heard so many people say, look, man, our community's full of veterans of law enforcement and military, some of whom are highly qualified and capable. Others maybe not so much physically anymore. But how do we make use of that if they are willing, if they're motivated to share their time to defend the little ones and patrol a school, or just be there as an armed, capable, loving presence to watch over the little ones, as a guardian angel, if you will? How does that best get arranged and vetted and prepped, in your opinion, brother?
Well, you kind of run into a multifaceted issues that they have here. One is some states have regulation that if a armed individual is going to be in the school, that they have to be state certified as a law enforcement officer. And if that individual is currently working for a law enforcement agencies, most of the schools don't have enough money or funding built into the budget to bring these people over and pay them equivalent to the salary they have. So it's going to be a cut pay. So now they're a cut and pay, but now they're also looking at people that are tail end of their law enforcement career, bringing them on. I'm all for it. Hey, if you're a good citizen and you can pass a real solid background check, one that's a little bit more in depth, because you're going to be around our nation's youth. You can pass that background check. You can pass a psychological background, and then the school is willing to provide the training and appropriate equipment that you're going to need to carry out your job as a school resource officer. Then the schools can, essentially hire their own. But it could be a policy issue, it could be a budget issue, or it could be just a workforce availability issue. So sometimes they're going to have to look at expanding their horizons, maybe getting that retired police officer, getting that retired military veteran that has a lot of training experience, that would love the opportunity to protect those kids. And not only is being a school resource officer, your last line of defense, that also comes with the right mindset. I spent about 6 months as a school resource officer at the very school my kids went to. I looked at it as, man, hey, what a great opportunity to make sure my kids are safe and the other community kids are safe, and spending that time with them. I even helped coach some ball teams and, got involved with it. I really, really enjoyed the job, but just that, it paid half of what I could do working somewhere else.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it's,
what do you think of the viability, the likelihood of there being volunteers who would do it at no charge? Let's say a school has no budget whatsoever, and a veteran's just like, you know what? I don't care. I kind of am inclined to just come and help if I can. You think that's likely, or?
It's very tough to do. One, scheduling. Either way, it's going to cost you time in order to have somebody supervise the program, and it's going to cost you some time out of some employees. Out of their budget for their salary, they're going to have to devote the time to make sure scheduling's done right, make sure training's followed, and everything else, and checking all the boxes, and then having volunteers. Well, volunteers are not being paid for it. Yeah, it may be great for 3 or 4 months, but hey, something in life comes up, that person can't show up, or they're going to deal with a shortfall or lack in staffing. Then when you have an unpaid employee, you get a little bit more dedication in that area.
Right.
So it's just a tough question that they all have to ask each other, and it's all boils down to the one thing that's always been a problem in education is cost.
Yeah.
We would love to have endless budgets to keep these schools safe and keep the education at the highest level it needs to be. Yeah, but budgeting always influences that.
Well, here's something I would like to recommend then. On the heels of this very important discussion, everybody that hears this broadcast, if you have a local school, whether you still have kids in there or not, I would encourage you to go to them and have the discussion and say, look, man, does your local patrol, law enforcement agency, whether it's sheriff's department or local police or constable, whoever patrols your area, do they have a communications relationship with your staff? And are they familiar with the terrain of your school? Have they been invited to have a walkthrough? Here's the layout. Here's everything that goes on here. And when you come here, we want this to be your home field advantage. Here's the keys. Here's how you come, access. And here are our cameras. And here are all the angles so that you can come right into the main office, take a quick glance, see where the shooter is, see if there's 2 or 3, or if they're scattered, or if there's one, and which room he's in. So you'll know exactly where to go smoke over there and take him out of the fight. And I think that's something that can genuinely help save a lot of lives. It doesn't cost anything but a little time and effort. And if a school administrator's inclined, that working relationship with the local patrol officers, that law enforcement agency could really help streamline the response. And like you said, seconds can be lives. And if that can be streamlined and expedited, because on game day, the terrain is already known. The communications are already known. The relationships are already there. And that patrol officer can get right into play much more effectively, much sooner. That's going to save children's lives. And that's something that I hope would be celebrated far and wide on all of our media outlets. What do you think about that?
Well, I absolutely agree with you. During the brief time I spent as a school resource officer, and and also here in Rutherford County, and what I've seen, my next door neighbor is a school resource officer at my son's high school. They train on the regular. They're SWAT. He's also a member of the SWAT team. He brings the team in once a year, and they do a walkthrough, whether it be a full training venue, whether it's during the nights or weekends. But some of the challenges that they face are schools being willing to work with them on time. And it's also good to train with the teachers there so they understand what law enforcement is going to do, and that enhances the communication in the event they have an incident. Well, who's going to pay those teachers overtime, or when are they going to squeeze in that training day? So there's a lot of facets and challenges they go over. But if you have a robust agency that's determined to make those schools safe, they will find a way to make it happen.
All right. There it is, folks. You may ask, what can I do about this, Craig, Forrest, Kirt? Well, that's something you can do about it. Every school, every community has schools, especially the elementary schools, but they're all vulnerable. And so if law enforcement are familiar with the terrain of the school and they have those relationships with the staff, I believe it's going to save lives. It's going to make it safer. And that's something that we can do without cost at just a little bit of time. And I encourage everybody to follow through on that to whatever degree I can motivate you to, because I believe that strongly that the children are our most precious and valuable resource. They are the most innocent and pure among us. They are under attack by many different means, and this is one of them, and their schools, and it won't do for this to remain. And so I encourage you to approach those school officials. And if you're a teacher or a principal, man, you've got that inside access to bring this discussion forward. And I hope you're blessed for having done so. And then if you can gain some success and coordination, share it with others and encourage and inspire others to do the same. Next thing you know, we may have an entire nation whose schools are a lot safer because law enforcement are very familiar and they know how to protect those schools. And it's just in the front of their minds rather than way back on the back shelf collecting dust.
Well, thank you for having me, Craig. I do appreciate it. I really support the mission for Veterans for Child Rescue. And as always, it's been a pleasure, and I hope we can do it again sometime, sir.
Yeah, we'll do something again. There's a lot coming up. There's a lot
Looking
coming
forward
up
to it.
We'll talk about later. But Forrest, what are your thoughts? This has been a good chat. How about you?
Well, I agree with a lot of what you guys have said. I'm always concerned about our policymakers and them having this gridlock mentality since, for the last 20 years. If we would just take what you said and then maybe throw some dollars towards a couple of options, allowing the schools to participate. I mean, we'll send tens of billions of dollars to other countries. We'll spend tens of billions of dollars on other issues that I believe are less important than what we're talking about today. We keep talking about this, but we've got this gridlock, and it just annoys me. And the only thing they talk about is gun control, and prohibition doesn't work. Okay, when you have gun control, the bad guys still get their guns. I've never met a bad guy that said, "Oh, well, I'm not going to do that because they've created another law." So those are my thoughts.
Yeah, I couldn't agree with you more. You have to follow the data, and the data does not support banning inanimate objects as a solution to what evil people do.
Well, so some of the biggest cities in this country have had the most stringent gun control laws, have the highest crime rates around. I mean, that's just the proof you need. Just look at it.
Yes, sir. Case in
point.
Gun
control does not work.
So, Kirt, thank you for coming on. We appreciate your time, your contributions. We hope you are blessed and your health continues to support you and be good going forward, brother. Everybody else, thank you so much for joining us on Defending Our Children and these lessons learned and contributions from Kirt Rothe. God bless. We'll catch you next time on Defending Our Children.
Thank you.